Hi and welcome. My name is Stephen Tracy, and this is the Empirical Storytellers podcast. It's a video series where I interview extraordinary people working at the intersections of data, AI, leadership, or product development. And today I'm going to be interviewing Jordan Rossman. He's someone who I met a while ago through a tech community / co-working space. And Jordan is a fascinating person because by day he is a real estate agent, but by midday or by night, he is a prolific vibe coder. Jordan does not have a technical background in engineering or development, but he has built and shipped some really impressive applications that have paid customers. So I was really excited to be able to interview him as the second guest on my podcast, where he's going to share everything from the applications he's built, how he's evolved over the years, what his AI tech stack looks like, and how he iterates his applications to achieve product market fit. So with that, let's jump in. So as a starting point for the conversation, I just wanted to get a chance to learn more about you. So obviously we know each other, but if you just want to give everyone watching like a quick introduction to your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Jordan Rossman. By day, I'm a real estate agent. I've done anything from solo real estate agent to running a team of up to myself and 7 other agents. I've been in real estate for 11 and a half years, but recently I've sort of broadened my horizons and entered into the tech space a little bit. And that's been a sort of become an obsession of mine, to put it lightly.
Right. And before we get into, I guess, the meat of the conversation, like you are one of the most prolific vibe coders that I've met that doesn't come from a technical background. Before you started getting into vibe coding with AI, did you have any background in software development or building products at all?
I had absolutely no experience whatsoever. I've always had a good social media presence, and I used to laugh because people assumed that because I was social savvy, I was tech savvy. I'm actually not a tech savvy person at all. I've still to this day never written a line of code in my entire life. I've never built any sort of consumer or B2B product. I have had no experience doing any of this sort of stuff. Um, but here I am.
I remember when we first met, you had built an mobile application that had, I think it was like aggregating local zoning documentation. And you'd built out a full mobile application. We could talk about that in a minute. I know you've moved on to some other apps as well. But what I wanted to start with was give me the origin story of how you got into coding with LLMs.
Yeah, so it started over the Christmas break in 2024. The term vibe coding wasn't even a term at that point, and I had no idea what any of this was. At that point, I want to say about a year into using ChatGPT just to ask certain questions. I had a client that wanted to purchase a property for some sort of commercial use, and we weren't sure if the zoning was going to work. And so I was searching through the zoning bylaws, and I've had to do that my entire career. And I've always sort of thought that this is the most annoying process imaginable. And, zoning bylaws are 300 page documents. Every city has a different document and they're all different. So one zoning in another city, like there's no sort of cohesive flow to zoning and getting answers around zoning. And so I had some extra time. I was sitting on my laptop trying to figure out this particular question a client had for me. And I don't know what inspired me to do this, but I asked ChatGPT, could could we build an app? And if I wanted to build an app, how would I do it? And that was really the start of all of this. It didn't have a lot of good answers. In hindsight, now that I look back on it, it probably gave me some bad advice, but the reality is it said, yes, we can build an app. And my next question was like, okay, how? How do we build this app? I have no experience in this whatsoever. Still to this day, when I look at code, there's certain things now that I can identify sort of what's happening. But for the most part, I had no idea what I was looking at. It could have just been in a totally different language. I mean, I guess it is a totally different language, but I didn't know what I was doing at all. But the fact that it just said, yes, we can build an app was enough for me in that moment that I just decided, okay, let's see where this goes.
What was the timeline from like that first moment where you're like, can you build an app to when you actually like shipped the app? And tell us what was in that stack. So you were working at GPT. Were there any other tools you were using to get that app up and running?
Yeah, so to get that app actually on my phone doing what I wanted it to do was about 3 to 4 months. But I think even more importantly, the thing that pushed me through to that point was the fact that I had something, the ugliest, most dysfunctional app you could ever imagine, on my phone within a couple of hours. And so I was using ChatGPT. It told me to download this program called Xcode. It started writing Swift code. It was saying, start open a new file, paste this in. I knew so little about it that I remember there were moments where I literally had to change a value from like 20 to 40 to make something look the way I wanted. And I would have to say, and I did this for months, rewrite the entire code file for me. I would copy the code file, I'd paste it in, rewrite the entire thing for me because I don't even know where to find this 20 that I need to turn to 40. And so then I would paste it back in and had a lot of issues. And so that that was frustrating, but at the same time, it was this like liberating experience where I had this idea, and a couple hours later, I had something on my phone. And so from there, it was this sort of explosion in my brain of like, okay, this is just a couple hours. What if I had months? What if I had years? What could I build?
If you could speak to, Jordan Rossman from, the first month of you working on that project today, like what advice would you give to yourself? Or like, if there's something you could do differently, what would that be?
Yeah, I don't know that I would do a whole lot differently because a lot of these frustrations were where I learned how things actually should work.
Yeah.
And I think that my evolution in terms of my skill set, my mindset, and how I approach these things has also evolved alongside the technical capability of these models, of these programs. When I started, there was no such thing as Cursor, there was no such thing as anti-gravity or Lovable or any of these sites that people are using now. And so I think that what I did in hindsight was exactly what I would recommend to somebody right now. You have to just dive in and you have to have a goal in mind of what I want this app to do. And then you just have to be persistent. You have to sort of relentlessly pursue that end goal, knowing that it's possible, and then just start trying those things and tinker and figure it out and have things that break and have things that don't work and keep going. I was talking to somebody about it the other day, and I literally said, just go like build a game that will play tic tac toe against you. It doesn't matter what the idea is to start. It's just you have to open your brain to the idea that you can build something. And once you start learning how to build different things, then when the idea, like a real idea, hits you, you understand that it's possible and you understand where to start.
That's an interesting idea. So before going all out into a big idea, get it to program a game or do some kind of starter project that might be totally unrelated to the bigger idea or vision. I think that's a really nice lesson for people, which is don't put like coding or vibe coding on this pedestal. Jump into it now with something smaller. So I think that's a I
Yeah,
like that.
and understand that there's an evolution to it and that you're at the beginning of the evolution and you're going to need to go through the process to a certain extent before you're able to take on a big idea or a big project. But even if you don't have that basic idea, you have AI. You can just say to ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, I want to start. I've never done this before. Can you give me 5 app ideas for things that would be good for a beginner to build using these vibe coding tools, and then just build one of them.
Tell me a little bit about what you're working on today. Do you have one key project or application you're building, or do you have a couple things? Just walk me through
Yeah,
what
so
you're working.
I've really dabbled in a bunch of different types of products, and every single time I did something, it was really in the pursuit of, sure, I had an idea for something I wanted to do, but it was in the pursuit of learning how to do and or use some sort of new technology that I saw come out. So my first one was an app called Zonable. It's dead now, but that was my first start, was this zoning app. And from there, as much as I put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into developing that app and it didn't turn into anything. What that did was it unlocked my brain to, okay, now I know how to build an iOS app. So I built another iOS app called Invisible, which is a AI follow-up assistant for real estate agents. And so that's currently in beta testing. We have about 60 users who are just sort of friends and colleagues of mine that are testing it to find out, okay, what's the spread? What's the thing that has to happen to make this from a cool app that I've got on my phone to something I can't live without? I've also launched a website called Property Brush AI. This one has turned out to be sort of the biggest success so far, and I had no intention of actually launching this to the public. I remember sitting there on some sort of social media feed seeing that Google had launched their Nano Banana image generation model. And I was like, how do I do something with this? And so I got this idea. I mean, I've been using Photoshop and Lightroom and Adobe photo editing platforms for a while, but I know that so many real estate agents have no idea how to do this. And photographers charge a ton of money to make simple edits. And there's services that will do like virtual staging and things like that. And they charge an absolute fortune. I mean, my whole career for virtual staging, I've been paying $40 for one photo to be edited. So I was like, there has to be a better way. I wonder if Nano Banana can do this. So I built and launched a website. It is very simply just a image generation platform designed for real estate agents to make real estate quality edits. And I launched Property Brush AI a few months ago. We're making some money. I'm not retiring because of it yet. Not getting any offers to exit, but we have real people using it for their job every day and willing to pay for it. So that's sort of my biggest success so far. And then I have a few other things. I mean, anybody who knows me really well knows that I am a staunch defender of Diet Coke. I love Diet Coke. I drink it every day. And I have a few people that are always bugging me saying it's bad for me. And I'm always happy to argue with them. So I built a website called dietcokedefender.com. That's literally just it's just an AI bot. I wanted to learn how to have a chat experience with AI. And so this was a good use for that. It's not something that will ever turn into anything unless some executive from Diet Coke is watching this video. But it basically is just, it will just argue with you to the end of time about how all of your thoughts about Diet Coke being bad are just wrong. And so that was another project. And then the fourth one that's live right now is I'm Jewish, and one of the issues that I've had in my religion is every time I go to a synagogue, we do the prayers, we do all this sort of stuff, and it's all in Hebrew, and I don't understand Hebrew. And so I listened to all these podcasts, and I was getting jealous of Christians because they would always be talking and they would like quote the Bible. They would quote this this person in the Bible said this, and here's how to live your life. And I was like, I want that. But I don't know what anyone in my religion says about how to live life. So I built something called dailyrabbi.com. Again, wanted to learn how to do something. So this is where I dove in and was like, I'm going to learn how to do an N8N automation. And I basically just have this N8N automation that hooks into this site and gives a daily teaching on Judaism every day.
What I am just fascinated by, like the projects that you're working on, is that you've got passion projects, you've got things that are directly related to work, and you've got paying customers for Property Brush, but you've also got these side projects that are creative outlets linked to things that you're passionate about or love. So I guess vibe coding here isn't just about building products for a big payday or an exit. You're actually vibe coding your kind of like a lifestyle where you're doing these kind of side projects that are just like meaningful to you and hopefully creating meaning for someone else. Like the Diet Coke one, it's funny, and who knows, like I assume you have some analytics. Like, do you have people visiting those
Yeah.
websites?
Yeah, I have people visiting them. Daily Rabbi gets a good number of visitors. And that was one where it's like, I don't ever want to charge for that. That if that became big, that's like hopefully my gift to the world as something that can just bring goodness to people who want something like that. Diet Coke Defender was just a funny thing for me to be able to send to my friends I'm tired of arguing with you. Go to this website and argue with them, and then I can watch in the back end all the ridiculous things that they're saying and that they're getting in return. But yeah, I mean, one of the things, and it's a double-edged sword because you can get distracted. But for me, it was just like once my brain accepted that I could build anything I wanted, the ideas are just endless.
I want to go back to Property Brush for a minute. When you first started telling me about this, as someone who recently bought a home and the house that I eventually bought was physically staged, when you first told me about this project, my brain just went to the risk. Like the risk of creating photos that are too photoshopped or make structural changes. And you immediately started being like, yeah, and this is what I did for that, that, and that. It sounds like in the process of building this, you built guardrails that are super robust, like telling the model, don't make any of these changes. Watch out for this. Don't change the address. Don't put a window here. And I'm sure there are still cases where it can kind of go awry, as that's how AI is. It's more of a feature than a bug these days. But
Yep.
I was just really impressed with how your app is able to build staged photos that are realistic but look better. So it's
Right.
not creating this fake promise of a house. Tell me a little bit about the iterations you've gone through and how you've had to go through and iterate this product and build in some of those rules and those guardrails.
Yeah. So my approach just in general is that everything that's difficult is an opportunity. Every time something gets hard, your competitors are quitting and they're going to say, "Oh, well, AI sucks and this use just doesn't work." And so from that mindset, I've really just understood that if you give AI very clear instructions, it will follow those instructions. I generally go with the mindset that every failure of AI is just a user error. Like you didn't put in a clear enough prompt. The first version of Property Brush AI gave people way too much freedom. You could draw in the picture, you could just type in what you wanted, didn't give them a lot of guidance. And I realized people were coming up with just ridiculous edits that they would never use. And it was like, okay, people are not going to pay for this. So, one of the biggest guardrails that I've done in both of my apps is I've moved away from the first version being this experience where you could just talk to it like ChatGPT and it would do something. I've realized that as bad as you think a consumer is at prompting, they're 10 times worse. And it was important to me that I could see their prompts in the back end and I would see them and say, well, of course you got a bad output. This is your prompt. And so I've moved away from this chat experience to more of a button drop down experience. So it's like, let's take as much user error out of the equation as possible. So now, if you went to go virtually stage a property, instead of having to type in virtually stage this with modern Scandinavian furniture and put a black rug here and a plant here and those sorts of things, I took that out of the equation by putting there's a tab for virtual staging. And then there's a drop down for what type of room is this? What type of furniture do you want? Any specific instructions can be typed in after that. And so that's the first guardrail is just imposing these UI features on people that eliminate the possibility for them to put in a bad prompt. Where if you click modern furniture, I've designed the prompt for what modern furniture should look like and what it entails and all that sort of stuff. In terms of the other guardrails that are actually just in the general system prompts, like the do not do these following things, you can't just build it, ship it, and forget it. I'll go in every day or at least every other day and look at all of the outputs that people are getting and see, okay, this shouldn't have done this. I saw that this person had to try 4 times to get the result that they ended up downloading. Why? Because what I found through doing that and having 1,500 properties have gone through Property Brush AI now, I have enough of a case to say, okay, these are the consistent things that AI just gets wrong. I've had people look at this and the first thing they say is, well, I can just generate it for free in ChatGPT. It's like, well, you can, but ChatGPT doesn't have all these guardrails built that are real estate specific. And this doesn't just have to be real estate specific. If you were doing image generation for another type of industry, the AI is a generalist, and your opportunity is to make your app the specialist for the output that your customers are looking for.
It sounds like you started with like the product was a chat interface and give people like as much freedom as they want. And I think that that's something that the SaaS and software development industry has learned over the last year, that is that AI is super powerful, but nobody needs another chatbot. And that was just a low hanging fruit that every AI first software application, whether it was a YC funded company or whatever, they all started with that. It was just like, here's a chatbot that's hooked up to, it's a wrapper for GPT or Claude. But hearing you organically start there and then work back towards UI and using LLMs as the engine that powers the product, but still designing an experience and an interface, I think is like very cool. And I think it shows that you've built something that has product market fit
Yeah.
and utility.
I always think of two things when it comes to this. The first one is one of my favorite Steve Jobs quotes that was just very simply, we don't ship junk. And so I don't ever want to just send anything out to the world that is junk. And the other thing is, I'm a huge believer that every human being on this planet has a handful of superpowers. And one of my superpowers has always been that I've just always assumed that I am the average consumer. I'm not a unique outlier. I am just the average consumer. I always assume that if I find something annoying, that other customers are going to find it annoying. I'm inherently lazy as a consumer. I don't want to go on to something that's really complicated or that has a steep learning curve. I want to go to a site for a particular thing. And I think that's the case with every site, whether it's going onto Amazon, you just want to buy something and leave. One of my key metrics is like, I don't want people to stay on the site very long. A lot of people obsess about how long can we retain this person on our site. I want you to come to my site, do the one thing you wanted it to do, and then leave as quickly as possible. And the more freedom you give, like you said, with these chatbot experiences, the more sort of paths that people can go down. And the more paths people can go down, the more likely you're going to have a poor experience, unless they just want to go on to ChatGPT and have a conversation about something.
You mentioned this earlier in terms of your evolving and iterating the product by going in and seeing the output and actually observing how your end users are using the product or the application. Are there other things you're doing to iterate? Are you talking to customers? Are you getting kind of qualitative feedback from them as well?
Gary Vee has this quote always like, to do things that don't scale. And so, a couple things I've learned from people who have created products that I use is I have like 10 or 15 users in both of my apps that are live that I will proactively send them a text and I'll say like, don't email support at Property Brush AI if you have a problem. Text me, call me. Like, I want to work on this with you and give them free credits, get them to go use it, figure things out. And so my only rule in those conversations, and I say this to them, is do not just tell me that it's great because you want to make me feel good. You're doing me a huge disservice. So I've just been very clear with 10, 15 people on both apps. I want you to use this. I want you to give me feedback. And I more importantly than a pat on the back, I want to know where it's dropping the ball. Like where does it suck?
I think you have just articulated something that I think is the ideal operating model for any tech founder in today's world, which is you're wearing every hat, you're talking directly to customers, kind of nothing involved in building this business is beneath you. And I say that because as someone who's founded multiple companies and even gone through startup accelerators, there are different types of founders and some of them don't want to get into some of this stuff. But I just think it's incredible that you're playing all these different roles: product manager, developer, talking to customers, getting feedback, and giving them like a direct line to you. I think that's pretty inspiring. And I think it's an operating model that I think any founder building a product, a tech product in today's world should really have.
You have to have a good feedback loop. I can't tell you how many features I've built in apps that I thought would be really cool and then nobody used them and then realized I'm not here to build something that just seems really cool to me and not cool to anybody else. I want to know like what are the things that are moving the needle. These are B2B products and these are my customers are people that are trying to grow their business, trying to make their business more efficient. And if it doesn't move the needle for them, then they're not going to pay long term. I really am just interested in knowing what are the things that you actually want to see in this and what are the things you're going to use and how do we make them just so good that you could never picture using anything else.
Can we just talk quickly about your tech stack? Tell me all the different tools that you're using for building on your kind of day to day basis.
Yeah. So there's been an evolution here, obviously, as technology has advanced. I started again with just ChatGPT, literally writing some code, copy, paste, back and forth. Then that evolved into using tools like Lovable for web apps. So Lovable, they accomplished a lot of the goals that I've mentioned that I've set out to accomplish is like, although Lovable does not make highly complex things, it makes it hard to build something that doesn't at least work. Like if you ask Lovable to build you a website, you're going to get a website. So
Right.
it has a lot of guardrails built into it. So I started using Lovable for web apps, and then I graduated to using Cursor. So I was using Cursor when Google's anti-gravity came out. I started toying around with that, and now I feel like I've reached the final boss of just using Claude Code and Terminal. And so that is my entire tech stack right now. I will go into Lovable. I have their most basic paid plan. I will start the most basic website, commit it to my GitHub. I will pull that into Claude Code, and GitHub and Lovable have this like live sync. And so I actually use Lovable to deploy web apps. I don't build anything in Lovable anymore, but as soon as I push it to my repo in Terminal with Claude Code, it live updates into Lovable, and then there's just that nice little blue button that says publish, and that's where I publish and host my websites.
It seemed like Cursor like was just dominating the world, and it seemed like that domination had no end in sight, for the last year. But Claude Code now, every time I talk to developers or people who are vibe coding, Claude Code is the first thing that comes up. So it seems like the team at Anthropic have done a lot of great work to
Yes.
build out their vibe coding capabilities.
Yeah, although for a beginner, there's less guardrails on just pure Claude code. So you can create something that is junk in Claude code. You have to have more experience and more structure when using Claude code. Other than the fact that Terminal is obviously more intimidating to somebody who has never done any of this. Outside of that, you need a more formidable process if you're going to build something from scratch with Claude code.
I got it. And I wanted to ask you about like model preference, both across brands like Gemini and Claude. I'm going to assume that most of what you're doing is Anthropic's models now. And if
Yeah.
so, do you find that you're swapping out or switching between models at all for different tasks?
Yeah, so I'm very specific so coding is Opus 4.5 right now. Any image generation is all through Gemini. And then I still find any of my apps that have some sort of chat or a feature where people can interact with the AI, I'm using OpenAI's models for those.
Okay, so you're still pretty diverse. Like you're working across Anthropic, Gemini, and OpenAI. So you're still working with the big three.
Yeah, and I mean, I like the quality of all of them. It's just for me, it's the path of least resistance. Like literally, I use OpenAI's models in my API calls a lot of times because getting a new API key is just easier on OpenAI's website. And I know if I need a new API key for something, I know just I'm 4 clicks away with OpenAI and I've got it. And their models are great at sounding human, talking, interacting back and forth.
What I wanted to ask you about is how do you go from an initial idea and is that idea just something that comes to you, or do you brainstorm it at all with AI tools? And then how do you go from that idea to actually start building and get from all the way up to an execution?
Yeah, so my process now is I will go into Claude desktop and usually I'll use Opus 4.5. Sometimes I forget to click that and it'll just go on Sonnet. Either one of them do well. And I'll basically just brain dump my idea for an app and I'll say, you know, all of these certain things that I'm thinking about. Here's my vision for this app. And then I will ask it, I want to have a back and forth conversation with you. I want you to challenge me when you feel I need to be challenged. I want you to provide ideas and input when you feel like they'd be necessary. I want you to ask me clarifying questions. And at the end of this brainstorming conversation, we're going to have two files that you're going to create. We're going to create a prd.md and we're going to create a design.md. And so I will go back and forth. I will answer the questions. I will provide input. I will maybe sometimes I'll go back and forth when it's challenging me on something like, do you think this is a good idea? Should we go here? Anyways, we'll have this 30-minute conversation usually within Claude. And at the end, I will get a prd.md and I will get a design.md. I will save those as markdown files within a new folder on my laptop, and then I will open up Claude Code in Terminal, and I'll say, hey, can you start working in this folder? It'll find the folder, and I'll say there's prd.md and design.md. And if I've done a good job, those will have enough detail in them where I basically say, read those files and start cooking. And it will read those files and start building off of that and give me my first look at a live visualization of what I had pictured. And then from there is when I start iterating, it's not going to go and set up your back end and do all these sorts of things, but it gives you this prototype that is a visualization of what you've pictured and what you've designed from there. I can't stress it enough. The more work you put into that conversation before you get those two markdown files is will pay benefits throughout the entire process. It's not just, hey, I'm thinking about an app, start coding.
Yeah.
It's if you take 30, 40 minutes to really nail down what is this going to look like? How is this going to function? You give this really powerful model a ton of really good structure to work from.
So earlier you talked about, you can't really observe where lines of code are breaking your app or things like that. You have to rely on the LLM to help you with it. With Property Brush now, which is a launched application with paid customers that you are actively iterating. Tell me a little bit about how you are debugging. So if you try to make a change and it breaks something, what does that process look like to try and fix that or patch it?
Yes, I finally, maybe a few months ago, finally wrapped my head around using GitHub properly and learning how to try a new feature or try and debug something without breaking the whole main code base. So that was a revolutionary experience for me. But in terms of debugging, I'm very simple. If it's a UI thing, I'll just take a screenshot of my laptop and drag it into Claude Code and say, this is what I'm seeing. And then very specifically explain what is not working very well. AI was not so good maybe a year ago at fixing those things, but now it's so much better at analyzing images. And so giving it specific instructions, you have to have an opinion. So you can't just say this doesn't look good. You have to drive it and push it in a direction. I've gone through a million different ways of doing this. I used to just put in a ton of like debugging code into my code base, and then I would have it take notes in a different markdown file. Like every time you add debugging code somewhere, like document where you've put it and what you put in this markdown file so that once we fix the issue, we can remove all of that debugging code. To now, before I go in and say, this isn't working, go fix it, I will say, this isn't working. Please do some research, both within the code base and web research, to find out what are the best practices for doing something like this. So if you're doing authentication and you want to add sign in with Google and sign in with Apple and something's not working, like go find the 2026 best practices for how to do sign in with Google and sign in with Apple. Go do a web search, go search through our code base. And before I tell you what to do, because I'm not the expert, AI is, give me a synopsis of where you think the issue is. And then I might even take it into a different platform. If it's complicated, I might take it into something like Cursor and say, here's the code base. Here's what Claude just told me was the issue. Can you verify this? What did Claude get right and what did Claude get wrong? And really just sort of taking a step back, not trying to one shot fix it, trying to identify what is the actual problem here, where did we go wrong, and what are the industry best practices for how to do this?
One of the last questions I have for you is how you would think about scaling something like Property Brush. Let's just say that things start to blow up in a couple months and your customer base really expands, or that you were to get some funding to build the project. What I'm kind of interested in is how you would approach like scaling from a people perspective. There's lots of people who talk about the traditional approach to building startups and companies. You're your founding engineer, you really kind of stack the deck with very technical people in the beginning, and that may very well be, what's needed for most companies. But to kind of put you on the spot, if you were to scale up and let's say had to add five or could add five new people to the company, next week, how would you think about those people? Or would you prefer to just continue building as like a solopreneur?
Yeah, so through my experience just in building my current business, I've realized that adding people when it would traditionally be the answer to add people is not always the best answer. I really think that the new model of startups in this AI era is as lean and mean as possible. Having said that, a huge part of all of my any success I've had in life has come from self-awareness. Like there are things that I'm just terrible at and I'll probably never be good at them because I'm just not even motivated to be better at them. And so once I get to a point where my personal limitations as a founder have been reached, find the person where like that's their thing. Find people whose superpower is one thing. I believe that everybody has a handful of superpowers. And so finding somebody where the biggest blind spot in your company is their superpower and then let them go with that. But again, scaling the unscalable, if I was going to hire a person, the only thing that matters is the user experience. Like that is the only thing that matters because how many sites have we seen in this new AI era where they come on the scene, they get a gazillion users, and then a few months later, nobody's talking about it anymore.
Jordan, thank you so much for joining the interview today. It was super insightful. It's been great chatting with you and hearing about your journey, vibe coding, building and shipping product, and great to hear about some of the projects you're working on. So thanks again for joining.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's an exciting time to be alive. I'm excited to see what the future brings. So thank you for having me on today.